Hi, everyone. My name is Kaveh Shahrooz. I'm a lawyer, I'm a human rights activist, and I'm a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. I want to welcome you to what I'm sure will be a really thought-provoking discussion hosted by the Cyrus Forum. The title of the talk, a conversation which is incredibly relevant as more and more people begin to see the fall of Iran's regime as a distinct possibility, is Iran's revolution and transitional justice. But before I get to that, I want to say a word about the Cyrus Forum, an institution that I'm very proud to be affiliated with. Cyrus Forum is a relatively new organization. It's the brainchild of my friend and colleague, the incomparable Maryam Memar-Sadeghi. And because it's a new institution, I want to spend a little more time introducing it to you. The Cyrus Forum is designed to aid peaceful, durable transition to democracy in Iran through a multi-stakeholder collaborative process convening Iranian leaders with each other and with international experts, lessons and best practices in priority sectors. The organization's efforts will result in a transition toolkit with needs assessment, strategic plans, and policy frameworks to facilitate stable change from tyranny to liberty. In the longer term, Cyrus Forum strives to become a think tank to foster Iran's democratic development and economic growth. It's guided by the following objectives: to prevent violence and instability upon overthrow or dissolution of the current regime, to ensure readiness for democratic transition and good governance, and to establish policy groundwork for rehabilitation of all sectors of political, social, and economic life. Three of the four of us, myself, Ladan, and Sarah, each of whom I will introduce in a moment, are actually advisors to the organization. Today's topic is focused on transitional justice. Each of our speakers will talk about some part of this important and complex issue. My role from this point forth is to speak as little as possible, but I just want to tell you in very broad terms what transitional justice is. Transitional justice is a term that refers to how a society which has experienced mass human rights violations responds to those violations after it transitions out of the conflict and into stability and hopefully democracy. Should a society in that situation prosecute all human rights violators? On one level, that might feel satisfying and be consistent with our innate understanding of justice. But what about the cost that imposes on such a society and the scars that it leaves? Particularly when very large numbers of people are implicated in those crimes. In a society like Iran, where thousands upon thousands have helped the Islamic Republic carry out torture and executions and repression, is it feasible to put everyone on trial? Or should a society provide amnesty to many of those who committed mass crimes? That might be easier, but what about the victims? Our speakers are going to be grappling with various dimensions of that question. And the way this forum will work is that each of our speakers will present for about 5 to 7 minutes, after which I will pose some questions. We have today an incredible roster of speakers. Our speakers, and I'm going to introduce them in the order in which they will speak, are as follows. Ms. Sarah Teich is an international human rights lawyer and senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. So she is actually my colleague, I'm proud to say. She's one of the legal advisors to the Association of the Families of Flight PS752 victims, as well as to the Canadian Coalition Against Terror. Dr. Ladan Boroumand is a historian, the co-founder and senior fellow at the Ladan Boroumand Center for Human Rights in Iran. She is currently writing a book on the tectonic social changes taking place within the Islamic Republic of Iran. And Shahin Milani is the executive director of the Iran Human Rights Documentation Center. He obtained his JD from Howard University School of Law and his LLM from Vermont Law School. With that, by way of an introduction, I turn it over to Ms. Sarah Teich.
Thank you, Kaveh, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today speaking with such an esteemed panel on this very important topic. In the 40+ years since the revolution that brought the Islamic Republic into power, it has been the Iranian people that have been most brutally victimized. From mass executions of political prisoners to violent crackdowns on peaceful protesters to the downing of Flight PS752 over Tehran, it has been the people that have been victims and regime officials that have been perpetrators. There have been mass atrocity crimes and gross violations of human rights, and many over the decades. Justice for those crimes is important, Accountability is important. Aside from how much it matters intrinsically to give voice to the victims and to start healing, atrocity crimes and human rights violations are far more likely to recur when there's no justice or accountability. In short, this isn't only about justice, it's also about deterrence. There are multiple options to pursue, both internationally and domestically. Some will only be available after regime change, but there are some that we can start straight away. First, we can and we should start collecting and preserving evidence of crimes straight away. This can be done right now by leveraging civil society on the ground, and as soon as it's practicable, an accountability project can be set up under the UN, either under the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, by General Assembly resolution, and this can be modeled after, for example, the accountability project for Sri Lanka that was set up recently and just renewed about a month ago. And then this evidence can assist with criminal prosecutions of those responsible. Prosecutions can take place domestically in Iran post-regime change. They can also take place in other countries such as Canada or the United States using extraterritorial jurisdiction or universal jurisdiction laws. And finally, prosecutions can occur at the international level, for example, through a specialized international tribunal for Iran or at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. I should note that for prosecutions at the ICC in The Hague to be feasible, there would either need to be a Security Council referral or Iran would need to sign and ratify the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. This is because presently Iran is not a state party to the Rome Statute, which means that the court actually cannot investigate crimes that occur wholly on Iranian territory. So without a Security Council referral, prosecutions at the ICC would probably only be available post-regime change if a new Iranian government signs and ratifies the Rome Statute and then declares the court's jurisdiction to be retroactive. There are also accountability options that can be pursued outside of Iran in countries like Canada and the United States, where there are strong Iranian diaspora communities. For example, in Canada, there's the Justice for Victims of Terrorism Act, and that allows victims of terrorism to sue perpetrators for damages in Canadian courts. The JVTA lifts state immunity for listed state supporters of terrorism so that states themselves can be sued if they're listed. Iran is a listed state supporter of terrorism in Canada, as is Syria. This can be leveraged by Iranians in Canada to obtain damages for terrorist crimes that are perpetrated by the Islamic Republic. And this was actually used very recently by some of the victims of the downing of flight PS752. In the United States, there's the Alien Tort Statute, and there's also the Torture Victims Protection Act, which allows victims to sue perpetrators in US courts. The TVPA is itself only limited to crimes of torture and extrajudicial killings. The ATS is a bit broader, but comes with its own jurisdictional limitations. But these acts can be used in tandem, and they can be leveraged both pre and post regime change, if ever and whenever a relevant Islamic Republic official is present in the United States. And finally, targeted sanctions can be used, and we've already seen those used in the context of Iran. In Canada, this is particularly important because there are new amendments to the laws that mean that assets of those sanctioned officials can actually now be repurposed and used to compensate victims. So I think I'll stop there because I've already thrown quite a lot of information out at everyone. But the basic idea I want to communicate is that there's quite a lot that we can do in terms of accountability efforts, and we can and we should start now. And these justice and accountability efforts will continue to be really critical as we move forward.
Wonderful, Sarah. Thank you so much for that legal overview. To understand this concept a little bit more historically, I want to turn it over to Dr. Boroumand.
Thank you so much, and thank you. I'm very glad to join you in this important discussion. As you said, basically, Kaveh, you mentioned the issue of accountability and prosecution, and Sarah focused also on this and on what we can do before the transition and the change of the regime. And this is exactly where I want to, to focus, because the accountability is one part of the transitional justice, but there is another extremely important part of the transitional justice, that is the truth. And without we have been witnessing the emergence of the transitional justice along with the democratic revolutions or velvet revolutions of the end of the 20th century, transitional justice, truth and reconciliation commissions are all new social, political, and juridical phenomena. This is a whole new chapters that stands in contradistinction with its predecessor, that was another form of transitional justice, that were the revolutionary tribunal and justices that marked, the big violent revolutions of the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. And it's by comparing these two types of transitional justice, the democratic transitional justice that we are talking about, and which is focused on the truth, and the revolutionary justices that were focused on falsifying the truth, on denying the rights of the citizen and the defendants, and on basically laying the ground for authoritarian and totalitarian regimes. And it's in the bosom of this form of justices that we can see how the origin of the future regime is formed. And that's why transitional justice is so crucial for the future, whether it takes the form of truth and reconciliation, whether it's prosecutes severely the perpetrators, or ends to pardon or other forms. The role that this transitional justice play is that, first of all, by restoring the truth and allowing the society to know the past, they allow the construction of the future. You cannot build your future without knowing the past. This is the first thing. Secondly, by collectively acknowledging the harm done to the victims and starting a process of reparation, they lay the ground for a social peace, because you can't leave thousands of people who have lost loved ones, who have been spoliated, and who have been their lives have been damaged without any response to that. And when the society acknowledge collectively and take responsibility for this harm, it lays the ground for a lasting peace. And another important role of the transitional justice also is that through the very process which acknowledge the right of the victim as well as the right of the potential or alleged perpetrator, it establishes the universality of the rights. And this is also, and the equality before the law. These are all important issues that also lay the ground for the emergence of the regime, the democratic regimes, and they allow you to provide the elements and the structure for building a new independent judiciary, because transitional justice is absolutely independent, an independent institution. These are the important roles that the transitional justice play and help the building and the laying the ground for future democratic regime, be it in Iran or anywhere else. So social peace, remedy for the victims, accountability, transparency in the modality of the procedure, and due process of law. All of these are the modality that also a society that is not used to democratic justice will learn what are the rights of the victims and the accused, how a contradictory process between the prosecutor and the lawyer of the accused functions. And slowly, it's also a lesson of democracy and the transitional justice is by definition a public justice, and the televisions and social media will focus on that and will also transmit the idea and democratic ideologies to a vast number of people who are stakeholders, whether they are witnessing, whether they are victims or their families, or whether they are perpetrators. So in all these aspects, transitional justice plays a crucial role in building the future democratic institutions, and we need to focus on them because they also have there are issues that comes with the transitional justice. What are the laws that become the reference of the transitional justice? If, for instance, for the Iranian regime, they have the law of the land is Sharia law, and it's the denial of the rights, all the rights, human rights. So how do we find, and this is an issue that legal experts must start working on it, which will be the laws which we will refer to hold accountable all the perpetrators? How do we work on that? These are the issues that, and if the court or the transitional justice establishes laws, is the court legislating, and how that works with the separation of powers in a democratic system. All of these issues are very sensitive issues that we need to focus on. And I would be really happy to, to listen to, because all the other panelists are jurists and I'm not a jurist. So this is a question that I would like to hear your input about. But the most important issue, I think, is the correlation between truth and democracy, and lies and autocracy or totalitarianism, and transitional justice become the dungeon of protecting and preserving truth in this process of transition toward democracy. I'll stop now, and I hope we can discuss the issues later in our discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Boroumand. That was really insightful. So we've heard discussions from Sarah about accountability, from you about the importance of truth. And I'm going to turn now to Shahin Milani to talk, maybe to synthesize those, or maybe to talk about the pragmatic and political aspects of these things. I think you're on mute, Shahin.
Yes. First, thank you all. Thank you for inviting me to be here. I want to delve into the practical aspects, and these are actually questions that I have more than answers that I could provide. But I want to really think about what is going to happen to Iran and how things are going to unfold. And these are questions that I've had in my mind for a long while. And now, as we're getting closer to that point of the regime's downfall, I think these questions are becoming more important. The one question for me is, how do we reconcile, seeking justice for the victims of the Islamic Republic with the principle of legality, and ex post facto convictions? Now, we know that under international law, we cannot claim that, we cannot go that route. That's not a defense against like genocide, and very serious atrocity crimes. But, what has happened in Iran is that, we have lower level crimes, or, I would say actions that should be considered as crimes. I'm going to provide, a few examples. Let's say the situation of Baha'is, that, they've been subject to systematic discrimination. As you know, Baha'is have been deprived of the right to higher education for, more than 40 years. What we're going to do about university presidents who have signed the orders to expel Baha'i students from university? So, that, well, it's not genocide. Maybe it's part of a broader campaign of, it could be considered as a crime against humanity. But it's not genocide. But what they were doing at the time, they're enforcing Iranian law. They're expelling Baha'i students from university. So what they were doing, well, is not illegal under Iranian law at the time that it's been committed, but from our perspective, they should be held accountable for that. What are we going to do with that? are we going to, prosecute them based on what law? Is it even wise to do that? That's just one question that I have, and I don't have an answer for it, to be honest with you. Another is more obvious is what are we going to do with security forces that have engaged in repression of protests? For those like commanders that have ordered the shooting of civilians, I think it's clear that we want them prosecuted. I certainly want them prosecuted. As to the soldiers who actually done the firing, perhaps yes, maybe we can have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. What about the soldiers who fired tear gas, or rubber bullets that haven't resulted in deaths? The soldiers who've beaten the protesters, soldiers who've arrested protesters, but later on those protesters have died in prison. What are we going to do about that? Another somewhat different question that I have is from the point that the Islamic Republic falls, then we until we have a new constitution and we have a new penal code, there's going to be a period of which we call it a purgatory, that we don't know what laws are actually applicable. I'm going to provide an example that can keep me up at night. But the crime of rape under current Iranian law has a very strict definition. It's only considered rape if there is penetration by male sexual organ into a woman's sexual organ. So that's a very specific definition that in most advanced societies the crime of rape is much more broader than that. But under current Iranian law, that's the definition of rape. Now let's say that the Iranian government falls on January 1, 2023, and we don't have a effective penal code ratified for like 2 years, 3 years. What happens to the rapes that happen in that period that a new penal code has not yet been adopted? Do we really want to enforce the very strict definition of rape under Islamic Republic law in that period, although the Islamic Republic has already collapsed, and we do not want the next government, which is secular, to be enforcing that law? Or we're gonna prosecute people for crimes that have not technically been crimes under law at that time. If they commit something that's not rape as the penal code is specifically defining at that moment in time. That's a very difficult question, both legally and politically. This revolution now is actually, women are leading it. It is about like women's freedom. It is a big part of it. Let's say the regime falls, but what are we going to Are we not going to protect women who've been subjected to rape? That's tough. But also, are we going to go against the principle of legality? So that's something that I've struggled with, and I don't know what's the right answer to. Another question is, what are we going to do with corruption of Iranian officials? A lot of the things that they've done, are corrupt. A lot of their practices, business practices, are corrupt. So again, the Islamic Republic falls, but we do not have yet a code that defines corruption and expands on it, and so under which we could prosecute potential defendants. Are we going to prosecute people based on the laws under the Islamic Republic? Or are we going to say, well, no law that has been passed and ratified under the Islamic Republic is legitimate anymore? I personally am hesitant to enforce the laws that exist that have been adopted under the Islamic Republic, because I consider them illegitimate. I consider the whole regime to be illegitimate. But on the other hand, I also want to preserve the principle of legality, and I don't want to get us into ex post facto convictions. So these are the questions that I have, and I think ultimately the decisions that have to be made to a large extent will depend on the political situation of the country, and what's the political strength of each side that's deciding these things. But these are some of the things that we have to keep in mind as we approach that day of days that we're all waiting for.
Thank you so much, Shahin, for posing these really important questions. And I understand totally why you pose them as questions, because they're incredibly difficult to answer. I mean, these are issues I think about, and I don't think I have any better answers than anybody really. So thank you all so much for this wonderful presentation. I just want to pose some questions to you now, and I want to pick up on a point that Ladan made in her presentation, where she was talking about Iranians being people that don't really have much experience with democracy, right? So that culture of democracy that a lot of other countries might be able to draw from, regrettably, we're lacking it. So I want to talk about sort of cultural barriers that you think might exist with respect to this concept of transitional justice, and some of the, aside from prosecution, there are some other approaches like truth and reconciliation commissions, for example, that have been tried in other places, which don't have a historical basis. Mind you, they were tried in places like South Africa successfully that also arguably did not have those traditions. But I want to sort of ask that question of you. Do you think that the absence of a cultural background in this is a hindrance? So feel free to draw on your understanding of Iranian culture and Iranian history, but especially somebody like Sarah, who may not be familiar with that history, feel free to draw from other places. So maybe Ladan, I'll start with you, and we'll go from there.
Well, yeah, this is an interesting question, but before I get to, I want to quickly respond to Shahin, because basically the issue he's worried about is also what I said. Does the court, the transitional tribunal, legislate as well as it judges or it process? But the question is that our history didn't start with the Islamic Revolution. We had a constitution, we had a criminal code. All of those have historic and democratic approbation. We can take those texts. I don't know. I'm just thinking loudly. We can take those codes, and as for instance, when Dr. Bakhtiar became prime minister, he said all the laws will be applied except those that are in contradiction with human rights. So we have a past that we can use to have a sort of legality that does not use the Islamic regime legislation, which is completely illegitimate in our view. So that was just pointing to this past that we can use and exploit in our transition toward the future. Kaveh, the notion that you mentioned, the cultural estrangement with democratic culture, I think that there is a natural instinct for justice that makes people understand. And we have had a very interesting experience with the Nouri trial. And all those who were plaintiffs and who were dead, none of them.
Because our viewers may not be familiar with that trial, so can you just explain that a little
bit? Yeah, the Nouri was a person accused of crime against humanity in a massacre of political prisoners, secret massacre of political prisoners in 1998. And thanks to the efforts of Iranian civil society and documentation, as Sarah, you mentioned, as a crucial action to to prepare the ground for justice, thanks to the work of victims and civil society organization and a corpus of documentation that was ready, it was the plaintiff were able to ask the Swedish government to arrest him when he came to Sweden, and there was a trial, and he was condemned to the maximum life imprisonment or whatever it is in Sweden. And the experience that the plaintiffs, who were most of them with a Marxist-Leninist background, a revolutionary tribunal, people tribunal, but not really due process of law, was a process of learning for them. And they were amazed by the mechanism of due process of law, and they adopted it, and they really defended it. If you remember, one of the plaintiffs whose brother had been killed was happy to defend the rights of the accused. And basically, truth becomes so important when there is, and I can tell you as a victim, and I think Shahin would join me in this, and yourself, and we are all victims in this tragic period. We don't want lies. We want the truth. We want the dignity of the truth. We want our dignity, and we want our the perpetrator's dignity to be respected, so that the evil he has done is highlighted, and he's condemned for the evil he has done, not for his person, who's really irrelevant, basically, during the trial. And the fact that the whole world, the judges, acknowledge the harm done to us, this is the cathartic impact of justice. And all of these people who were at this trial, I'm sure their brothers, and in 1979, they were saying, we want execution, a revolutionary tribunal. Those people are becoming the defenders of due process of law, even for their persecutors. So I think the cultural issue is not an issue, and that's why a transitional justice mechanism is so important, because it will disseminate these ideas and people will adopt them. The difference of democracy with totalitarianism is that there is something natural in justice that will attract. Some people will try to play violence, vengeance, vendetta, and all of this because they have a political agenda. But ordinary people who have been harmed will be very content with due process of law and democratic justice. I think that's the truth. I'm not worried about that part. But the important thing is that all those who have a public voice promote this on a vast scale, so that a discourse is established and is circulate in public space that explain the importance of a fair trial, even for those who have harmed us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Shahin, do you have any thoughts on the cultural aspect of this?
Well, I do not, we haven't had free elections in Iran. So, it's very hard for me, absent free elections, to, gauge what the Iranian people really think and what they believe. I think that's the tool with which, in modern societies, we can say, what the people believe in. Even opinion polls tend to be wrong in many instances, as you're all well familiar with. But from what are my interactions with Iranians, on social media and in the real world, you see that there are some segments of the society who, unfortunately, really kind of they're so angry, which I can understand that, but they seek kind of revolutionary quote unquote justice. You see that a while back, some person actually went in and killed a couple of clerics in Mashhad, with a knife. And I, as a human rights defender, I said, well, that's not how modern societies work. We cannot have vigilante justice like that. People have to, if those clerics have committed a crime, they should be prosecuted in a court of law that respects due process. But a lot of people attacked me on social media, on Twitter, because they felt that I was kind of being tolerant towards the clerics, and that I liked the mullahs or things like that, which obviously isn't true. I just want basic human rights norms. So because of what happened in 1979, and we know that's our most recent precedent, and considering that the Pahlavi dynasty kind of fell not with a lot of violence compared to how the Islamic Republic is going to fall. I'm sure that when it comes to the point that Islamic Republic falls, they have killed a lot more people. Unfortunately, I think that's the fact that we all know and we can acknowledge. So by the time the Islamic Republic falls, a lot more people have died. A lot more horrible tragedies have taken place, and people are rightfully going to be very, very angry, and in a society that isn't used to seeing trials on TV, seeing people like O.J. Simpson being convicted because being acquitted because the technicalities of the rule of that were necessary for his conviction were not met. I think it will be very, very it will be difficult. Just imagine that a commander, an IRGC commander that we all know played a crucial role, is faces a trial, a fair trial, and because of lack of evidence, or like the fact that the evidence might be tainted or whatever, any technicality, that I'm assuming that we're going to have a fair trial for this person. For some evidential rule, that IRGC commander is acquitted. I'm not sure that the population in Iran are going to necessarily accept that very peacefully. I think people are going to be really mad. So there are political considerations, and a lot will depend again on how fast the Islamic Republic will collapse and how many people it will kill before it collapses. So I want to be optimistic, and I want to be hopeful that Iranian people will not want to repeat what happened in '79. But I also want to be realistic and consider the possibility that unfortunately some segments of the population might not be amenable to the idea of having long, lengthy trials. The possibility that a person that was an influential person in the regime could be acquitted. But I think we have to talk about that. We have to say that, okay, we're gonna have fair trials. You have to be ready that some of these people might be acquitted if it's a fair trial and the evidence isn't there, or we cannot establish evidence. You have to be ready for that. My optimistic self wants to think that that's possible, but again, with the amount of killings that's going to happen, I'm a bit skeptical of that, to be honest with you.
Thank you, Shahin, and I hope the more optimistic prediction comes to pass. But I do share that worry. Sarah, do you have some thoughts on that, drawing maybe from other places that didn't have that historical background in democracy and what their experience was?
I don't know if I have an exact relevant example, because every situation is so unique. But just building off some of the things that have already been said, I think this possibility of acquittals is important to talk about. And this also really underscores the need for evidence collection that starts like right away. And something else that you said, Shahin, which is really interesting is, earlier in this panel is, who do you prosecute? Do you prosecute some of the lower level people? And I think that raises an important point, is that you can't actually prosecute everybody. No one can. Even at the ICC, I summered there years ago, and I remember having to make some really tough choices about who to issue arrest warrants for, because there just weren't the resources to go after everyone we wanted to go after. And the same is true at any domestic country. Same is true at any international tribunal. So I think if you pair those choices with looking at what evidence you have, looking at, if you're looking at international courts, who you can extradite out to The Hague or wherever, you're going to have to make some tough choices. And you want to choose cases that have a strong chance of success, a strong chance of convictions, and where the evidence is really strong against that person. And that potentially could mean avoiding some of the lower level folks, but you do make those choices because you do need to have prosecutions, and you need to give everyone a fair trial, because that's one of the building blocks of a democratic country. And if the next government is going to be a democratic one, that's so fundamentally important. And when you don't have justice, when you don't have any prosecutions, for example, going back to Sri Lanka, maybe that's not the best example in terms of a country that has no cultural background, but I happen to have done quite a lot of work on that file. And in Sri Lanka, what you've seen is that there's no prosecutions, none domestically. There's no accountability efforts because the same government is still in charge. So it is a very different situation than what we hope will come to pass. But what you see in that case is that the crimes are having hugely high risks now of recurring. In the last couple of years, there's been a really strong democratic backsliding, and that's been tied, to the lack of any accountability, and that impunity really raises the risks of crime in the future. So I think when we're talking about this, we also have to think about not just 5 years from now, but 20 years from now, 30 years from now, what gives the best chance for this not to happen again.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and everybody for your really thoughtful responses to that. I had a couple of other questions that I wanted to ask, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine them just in the interest of time. So, we've talked a lot about legal institutions, we've talked about courts and so on, but I want to talk maybe just a little bit about other types of institutions that drive culture and their role in all of this, and the role in preserving memory in such a way so that there is not a repeat of these gross violations of human rights. So I'm thinking of educational institutions. I'm thinking of museums. I'm thinking of labor unions. Just things that drive culture. I want to sort of get your thoughts on, first of all, how do we clean these places up? So Shahin made a reference earlier to the university president that kicks out Baha'i students because to use the famous phrase, he's just following orders. Is it necessary for these cultural institutions to basically just purge people that have played along with these rules? This is what the Iranian regime did when it came to power. It had a cultural revolution where it got rid of a lot of people that were kind of affiliated with other ideologies, competing ideologies. So first of all, what does the cleanup of these institutions look like? And secondly, what role do they play? What role should they play in order to effectively ensure memory is preserved and that a culture of human rights takes over? So maybe Shahin, I'll start with you for that question.
It's a very good question. With respect to university, I think probably we're gonna have to, not necessarily purge, but the new government will have to, appoint a new official just for the sake of competence. It's not even, doesn't even get to the point of accountability. I think it's just a matter of competence, because actually Iranian universities are really in a situation that their academic standards have fallen, and there's a lot of corruption in there. So I think that will happen. But with respect to the culture, I can give you an example that me and my friends we've talked about. We often talk about it. Just the names of the streets in Tehran, for example. Okay, so there were many streets who had pre-revolutionary names, then they have revolutionary names, and then, what are we going to do afterwards? What are we going to do with the, Azadi Square? Are we going to call it Shahiyat, or are we going to call it Azadi Square? Or we're going to, find another name? Or what are we going to do with the, Pahlavi Street? Is it going to be renamed after, the Pahlavi dynasty? They also committed, human rights abuses as well. Are we going to purists, come up with a new name? And what are we going to do with state, murals for example, the victims of the people who were killed in the Iran-Iraq war, the soldiers? Tehran and other cities are, filled with this kind of murals that they sometimes glorify martyrdom. But at the same time, these are people who, defended the country against a foreign aggressor. So, what do you want to do with that? Again, these are tough questions. That's, in some cases, I think they're answers. I don't think, Khomeini deserves, to have a square named after him, because he committed, mass murder. But at the same time, again, like another question, like, what are we going to do with the highways that were built under the Islamic Republic and they were named, there was a big highway named after Khomeini's son, like, what are we going to do about that? How are we going to rename that? So these are again, I don't have answers as to what is to be done. I have more of questions. I believe that as far as the event, we talk about institutions, we have a bureaucracy, okay, that it goes way back to the Constitutional Revolution. Those institutions that were created, after the Constitutional Revolution of 1905, under Reza Shah, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Education. I think we want to keep the Iranian bureaucracy. We don't need to replace it wholesale. But I think, like, mid-level managers, they could stay. But I think, the ministers obviously will just be replaced as a matter of, political practicality. But I do not want the next government to engage in, purges in a sort of crazy vigilante way that the Islamic Republic did, in 1979, 1980. That's not something that we want to repeat. But at the same time, really, we have to move beyond the ruin that the Islamic Republic has created. And I think just by replacing the top level of government officials, a lot can be done.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Sarah, I want to come to you, and you're of course free to talk about whatever aspect of this, but I think of those of us here, you can probably talk by virtue of kind of your religious background and so on about the Holocaust experience and kind of what was done culturally to prevent that. So, as I said, free to talk about whatever, but if you can draw from that, I think we would find it very useful.
Sure, yeah, I can definitely speak to that. I mean, it's interesting timing for that as well, because you see a rise of anti-Semitism all around the world, attacks against Jewish people all around the world, including in Western countries, including in Canada. I remember, I think like sometime last year, we were told by Toronto police to not leave our houses one evening because there were threats against full Jewish neighborhoods, and somehow that didn't make mainstream press, but it was pretty scary. And I think that can sort of be tied to, among other things, growing Holocaust denial throughout the world. And so I think that sort of illustrates one of the dangers when you don't remember the past, or when you distort it in some way, when you deny that it existed. So I think that, more than giving a new insight, that sort of emphasizes the point you made, Kaveh, that it is so important to remember what happened, to learn lessons for the future so that these things don't get repeated.
Thank you so much. And I want to give the last word to Dr. Boroumand. I mean, your organization focuses on memory and preserving truth. So I think it's best that we end with some statements.
Yes, yes, exactly. And it also connect with what Sarah just said, because one of the reasons we started, I mean, we had my first human rights reports dates from 1982. So we started very early on, and what became Omid Memorial, which is an online memorial, interactive online memorial, the nucleus of that was in this report, where we thought we should memorialize every single person this regime has killed, whatever the charges.
I interrupt you for 1 second just to tell you the first time I ever interacted either with you or your sister was maybe 10 or 15 years ago, when I was just scrolling the internet and I saw a picture and a description of what had happened to my uncle who had been executed. And it was shocking, both emotionally, but also in a very positive way, that somebody had taken care of remembering his story and how important that was to me.
Exactly. And that's why we did it. We did it for several reasons. Why? One was that just to say that memory and remembrance is not only you learn from it, and we learn a lot from the effort done regarding the Holocaust. When we started our memorial, online memorial, we went to the Holocaust Museum and met with the person who was in charge of crime against humanity, current crimes against humanity, and shared our ideas with that person. And the very name Omid, which is hope in Persian, was suggested by him. He said, give a hopeful name to your memorial, to tell you how much the effort done by the Jewish community around the Holocaust issues has taught us what we should do and what is important to do. And exactly what you say, the Omid Memorial had several objectives. One was to keep the record of state violence for the future, for historical justice, because even if you don't have judicial justice, you will always have historical justice, and that we know about it. And the second was that to teach to the Iranians that whoever is killed upon the violation of due process of law is a victim, because no matter how wretched a person is, this person has human dignity, and we need to respect this dignity. So, for instance, I know that Rafsanjani has ordered the killing of my father, and if it's established that he has been killed in this swimming pool, he would figure in Omid Memorial exactly with the same rights that my father has in this very memorial. We want the Iranians, because we are a traditional society, and there is, in this traditional society, elitism is prevalent. So you have heroes like political prisoners, and those people's rights are, celebrated, and their memory is cherished. But we have ordinary people. We have the prostitute. We have the drug trafficker. And you don't even know if these people are what it's claimed they are. So we wanted to have a democratic way of memorializing. And the other thing was exactly your reaction, Kaveh, was that we wanted our fellow citizens to know that there is somewhere, someone who cares. And this someone is your fellow citizen. Is not your ruler, is not a foreign person, has no institution or power with it, just cares because you are a human being, and it considers its obligation and moral duty to do something about this injustice. And we have reaction like yours. We have had many people are depressed. They click the name of their loved ones, and all of a sudden they see the name somewhere from people who don't know, or not the same political background, not even agree with the opinion of the victims, but celebrate its memory because there has been an injustice and it must be repaired. So I think the educational effort, even when you think it's not useful, it is useful. And I think all the work done, even if there is, an orchestrated anti-Semitism supported by different forces and governments around the world, the fact that this work has been done, I mean, we did, when Ahmadinejad denied the Holocaust, we launched a text, a petition countering this denial and reaffirming the truth of that. And I can tell you that in the countries that we tried to gather Iranian signature, Germany was where we had the most facility to get all the signatures. Even people who were pro-Palestinian, anti-Israeli occupation of territories, or they signed without hesitation. Where we had the most difficulty was in the United States, believe it or not. Their scholars were hesitant, they didn't, but we gathered very easily from left to right the signatures of many people at the time to counter Ahmadinejad's statement. So the educational work is very important. And I think when we cannot prosecute everyone, we need to prosecute the evil that is done without the person. And the memorial, the historical work, documentaries, films that have been, all of these remain in the brain of the young people and future generation. And I think also regarding the purges, we should learn from Germany. German transition, at the beginning, it was very frustrating, I think, because they didn't do much. But the following generation took up the responsibility and started to morally prosecute the generation of those who had perpetrated and joined the Nazis. And I think when you cannot prosecute personally or individually, you should continue prosecuting culturally the facts, the evil, and that could balance this danger of not doing anything or not holding everyone accountable, because then it will create havoc and it will be difficult to build the future in a positive way. That's all I can think of, but I think we can learn a lot from history in that as we make history.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful, rich discussion. And I want to thank all of you for participating. Sarah Teich, Dr. Ladan Boroumand, Shahin Milani. I want to thank the Cyrus Forum and Mariam Memar Sadeghi for giving us this platform. And to those of you that are going to be watching this, I want to thank you all for watching. Like everything else I do these days, I just end it by saying Zan Zindagi Azadi. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.